For those of you who don't know me, I'm Sarah Middleton, the Head of Communications and Advocacy for the DPC. And I've been asked to say a few words, give a few thoughts on cost modelling for digital preservation to introduce this section of the afternoon, to kind of bring us into the kind of hands-on, practical art of cost modelling. And a lot of the experience and the insights that I have that I will share with you all, my pearls of wisdom, come from the DPC's involvement in the 4C project that William mentioned earlier, the collaboration to clarify the costs of curation. And that, again, as William said, it was a European-funded project that included and involved a bunch of organisations from across Europe, JISC, 13, JISC, DPC, others, and built on, didn't want to reinvent the wheel, was very clear about that, but wanted to build on work that other projects had done, projects that Neil, Paul have all been involved in, and we've heard about anyway today, so I won't go into those, but that was the premise, and that was why the project came about. But to cost modelling and the question of why we might want to predict the cost of digital preservation, we've heard an awful lot of use cases from Mary and from Patricia online earlier, but also from Neil and from William. So to summarise, I'm going to borrow from a blog post called Cost Modelling, Where Did It All Go Wrong? By somebody called Paul Wheatley. And it summarises 5 kind of key objectives, 5 key reasons why we might want to cost model. And Paul astutely notes that this might be to, if we are building a new repository from scratch, perhaps it would be to help us plan and budget for it. If we've been asked to add a new collection to our repository, we'd need to know whether we can afford to do that or not. We might be evaluating, refining, comparing life cycles between organisations to see whether there are opportunities to introduce cost efficiencies. Or you might be thinking whether or not to outsource digital preservation or whether to do that in-house. Or you might be a vendor and you might want to know how much to charge for providing your digital preservation services to clients. But across the board, and sort of to summarise all of those, and from all of the reasons we've heard today, I think what we're hearing is we want economic sustainability for our digital preservation activities. It's not just a single investment. It can't be a single investment. It's not a project. We heard that before. It's for the long term. It's kind of a commitment, and that's what we want to demonstrate. And a lot of this, there's been a lot of research, we've heard a lot of research into cost modelling, into digital preservation. And this research emphasises the cost and complexity of the task in hand. And that's not to say that it isn't complicated. It can be. It costs what it costs, though. I think that's the that's the thing to remember. And as long as we're accurate about that, and we're not sort of undermining the cost to get it through a business case review to kind of appease budget holders. Because if we do that, then we're only going to be left short of funds, short of resources, and with a digital legacy that we can't afford to maintain. And 4C reminded us that the point of this investment, whatever that may be, is to realise a benefit and should factor in things like risk, value, quality, and sustainability, whatever that cost. And there's a whole pile, lists, reams, pages of existing cost models that you can go and look at. And on the 4C website, for example, there's a summary table of just a few that we looked at and kind of compared and contrasted and did a gap analysis report from, so you can go away and look at that. On the OPF wiki as well, there's a great big long list of existing cost models that you can use. There are other places too, I'm sure, that you can go and find this information. Neil's told us about some, the KDRS model, for example. There's LIFE, and we're going to hear about a new one from the Dutch Digital Heritage Network, which from now on I'm going to just abbreviate to DHN because it's too much of a tongue twister. So I was going to pause briefly just to see whether anybody had tried using any of the existing cost models out there rather than kind of building their own as a first thought, or how you might have gone about cost modelling. Any thoughts? Anyone want to volunteer? No? I mean, that's fine. I mean, because what we've heard from the other presentations today is that it's a really complicated thing to do. And it's not just a complicated thing to do on its own, it's a complicated thing to do because digital preservation is complicated. It's a moving target. Day on day, week on week, year on year, definitely. We're faced with new challenges, new approaches, new technologies. There's no level playing field. There's no one-size-fits-all answer to the question, how much does digital preservation cost? And even if you were to find that out by some kind of stroke of genius, it would have changed the next week probably, or the next month. So this kind of just re-emphasizes the fact that it's a question for the long term. It's about economic sustainability. It's not just about a one-off kind of situation. So what the same research has tended to find is that something along these lines. An organisation needs to model its costs, and it reviews existing cost models with a view to not reinventing the wheel, because nobody wants to do that. The same organisation finds that the models are too complicated or they don't quite precisely meet the needs, so they adapt an existing model or they create a new one, which, as Neil pointed out, is not a quick exercise, and as we've heard from the others online, is very much a toing and froing, kind of a years in the making. So it's not a light undertaking at all. And in the end, the organisation ends up with a model that was potentially as complicated as some of the models that they looked at in the first place. And we've got another model, another cost model to add to the list. So what seems to be needed, what we've heard is that the reason that the 4C project was created was that it needed to be a common approach, a uniform framework that could be applied, that was kind of widely understood and widely applied to as many organisations and as many organisation types as possible. Because often an existing model might be applicable very nicely for, I'm thinking of the DP4lib, for example, which is beautifully arranged for libraries but might not be as useful for some of the other organisation types or sectors. So yes, so the 4C project wanted its stakeholders to know and understand and be able to use existing resources where they were applicable without reinventing the wheel, because nobody wants to do that. But also they wanted to look at the existing models and see how they might be made more fit for purpose, more useful. And going back to the same blog post that I mentioned before, that Paul wrote, and now available on the OPF. It's available on the OPF wiki, isn't it? No, OPF blog. I'll share all the links, by the way, to everything I'm talking about later. So, Paul noted that what was probably most usefully required to accurately model costs was cost data itself, real live cost data from real organisations who were doing digital preservation. And recognising this as well, this 4C project built this thing that William referred to before, the Curation Costs Exchange, or the CCEx. So the DPC was involved in the work package that was tasked with creating this CCEx. And I'm not going to lie, when we started out, I must say, I didn't know what on earth they were talking about and how it was going to come about and what we were going to end up with. But we did. And I should firstly make a very important distinction that I have been talking about cost models, but the CCEx itself is not a cost model. It's not a cost, it's not a cost model, no, that's right. It's also not a cost calculator. It's not supposed to predict how much it's going to cost. However, I'll come back to that. It was designed to clarify the costs of curation or digital preservation, and to ask organisations and help organisations identify what they are spending on digital preservation in different areas, across different areas of their activity, of their organisation. And in doing so, and in encouraging organisations to enter their cost data into the CCEx, others might be able to see that too, compare and identify areas where they may be able to introduce cost efficiencies or just do things a bit differently, or contact that first organisation and say, hey, can we talk about the way you're doing that, because I looks like I'm doing it differently. So the 4C project aimed to be, and I think it was, open and social. That was our little catchphrase. The project team blogged its findings as it went along, and one of the most important things it did was to engage with a large and varied group of stakeholders, so from all sorts of sectors and organisation types. And understanding and recognising that traditionally organisations have been very reluctant to share this cost data, we asked them why. We asked our stakeholders why that might be. And why that might be boiled down to pretty much two key things. One was that it was really, really hard and nobody really knew the answers. So even if they knew the answers, well, they didn't know the answers basically, so they couldn't share. And the other one was confidentiality. They just weren't in a position to share that sort of information, even if they could get their hands on it. Therefore, and trying to address those issues, the CCEx used what we've realised was possibly needed, was this commonly understood activities framework. But not just that, but I'll do the activities framework first. So it offered two ways of spreading your costs and understanding your cost data. So one was through by sort of spreading your costs across activities like pre-ingest, ingest, archival storage, access, and an other, the controversial other, because that was felt to be a bit miscellaneous. So that asked organisations to spread what they were spending, if they could, over these activities. But recognising, and I think that came across quite apparently in the case studies we heard from online, was that not all organisations did that. That wasn't, it might be the thing that we think of as digital preservationists, as archivists, as kind of the process. But that wasn't how the organisation broke its costs down. So a bit like Mary showed us her data collection, or rather the data collection scenario from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. There was an opportunity to share costs across the different sorts of purchases you might make, either on technology or other things. And staff. So it offered a great long list of staff roles that might be involved in the digital preservation process. Not just the digital archivist, but incorporating the IT department, the HR department even. And to address the second issue of confidentiality, the CCEx offered a means of remaining anonymous. To use the CCEx, you have to register, you have to kind of say who you are and who you work for, but that's kind of so that we know that you're not a robot, basically. But beyond that point, you can be as open and social, to use a phrase, as you would like, or as private and anonymous as you like. So you can say, I'm going to pick on the German National Library again. You can say, hi, I'm the German National Library, this is my collection, this is how much I spend on this. Or you can keep your organisation kind of private and share your collection information, or just share your cost information. Or you could share it simply as part of the aggregated mass, so that you're kind of lost within it, but your cost data still counts, it still informs. So we know that obviously isn't going to be perfect for everybody, but as William said earlier, we did a little kind of number crunching exercise a month or so ago, and we found that, hey, well, we knew this anyway, but it's working for some people, because there are 240 odd data sets in there for you to use. And these data sets are from national libraries, archives, public libraries, local record offices, universities, projects, vendors. The only condition is on you using those is that you share your data too. So I'll just add a word of caution, however. And a return to my earlier observation that there is no level playing field, there's no one-size-fits-all answer to the question, how much does digital preservation cost? Because there isn't really an average. I mean, the CCEx presents you with a global average, or a peer-to-peer comparison, actually, I forgot to mention that. But there's no average organisation. Everyone is unique. And I highly doubt that any one organisation is spending €152.64 per gigabyte per year on their digital preservation. But, you know, you can use it as you need. Use it to identify trends. Use it to introduce cost efficiencies if that's your aim. I'm going to pause just briefly. I don't know how much time I've got to kind of ask you this, but I did send you, last week I sent you a link to a short video on the CCEx, and I'm hoping that you managed to get a chance to look at that. On previous kind of asking of this question, we found that not so many people in a room were familiar with the CCEx in the first place. Paul is. And I know Herman is. But I just wondered if I could have a quick show of hands of how many people, first of all, did know about it, had heard of it. Oh, right. Oh, okay. Well, it's you lot again. I knew you knew. Okay. And for those of you who hadn't heard of it / hadn't used it, having watched the video, having sort of heard a bit more about it just now, is it something that you think might be useful? Is access to real cost data something that you would use and plug into your own cost modelling exercises? This is good. Yeah? Yeah, so this is part of the problem. I'll just repeat that for the online feed. So a representative from a bank has said that yes, it would be useful but difficult to use as part of a corporate organisation. Well, that's encouraging. I'm pleased. I'm glad. But maybe another question is, in that case, is there anything that it could do above and beyond, as well as, or differently? And just before, Williams wants to say something, but just before I'll let you, the reason I'm asking this is obviously, I mean, for two reasons. One of them being, for the purposes of this workshop today, we want to know whether it does meet a need, whether the real cost data is a thing that's required and would be used and useful. But also because we may have the opportunity to do a bit more with it. We may have access to more funding to kind of develop it a bit further. So I'm not going to go around the room and say, you know, oh yeah, this would be good. But there's a feedback form on the CCEx website itself in the About page. And there's a little link to a feedback form there. And if you were able to, well, if you wanted to say anything specific, then that's the place to do it. And they'll come to me. So I can gather and stuff. Okay, William? Yes.
Just what I was going to say. So maybe what we could do is pick this up as a theme in the discussion session after we've heard from Herman. And
yep, that's a good idea.
Because there is a question there to ask, what research do we need to do next? And one of the questions is, how can we get tools that, for example, would meet a corporate need better? And how could the CCEx or other tools be brought to bear to support that kind of work? So there's some good questions for us there. Maybe we could take those in the discussion.
Absolutely, yeah. Great. Well, thank you. But for now, I'll go back to the cost modelling bit. Say that one of the newest cost models on the block was the DHN's recently developed cost model. And this builds on and is consistent with the CCEx. So I've read the paperwork, and that's what it says, so I'm going with it. And just to kind of recap, I suppose, in 2015, having developed and launched the CCEx, upon which this new cost model has aimed to be so consistent, the 4C project wrote this in its roadmap. In 5 years' time, in 2020, it will be easier to design or procure more cost-effective and efficient digital curation services because the costs, benefits, and business cases for doing so will be more widely understood across the curation lifecycle and by all relevant stakeholders. Cost modelling will be part of the planning and management activities of all digital repositories. So we're less than a year away from 2020, 6 months-ish, I suppose. So I was wondering, I don't know the answers, but you guys probably do better than me, whether that vision has become a reality. Question mark, a big question mark. Is cost modelling for digital preservation part of the planning and management activities of all digital repositories? Probably not, from what we're hearing. But we do know that organisations are using the CCEx, but has this access to real cost data been what's required? Perhaps the question is, as we know that new cost models are still being born, we're going to hear about one in just a second, whether digital preservation costs are better understood, perhaps now than they were 5 years ago. Are the cost models that are now being born, are they more enlightened and applicable? Are they more accurate? Are they more usable, useful than they were when the CCEx came into being and when the 4C project finished? So with that, I'm going to hand over to Herman, who's looking pretty comfortable there. It's time for you to come and tell us about the DHN's cost model. So I'll leave that, those set of questions kind of in the air while we hear from Herman, and about some of the experiences that the DHN's partners have had in using this new cost model to see whether that might be the case. So thank you very much.